Everyone ready for more JavaScript? Are we feeling good about it so far?
To answer your first question, no. Feeling good? Maybe. Need a job? Hells yeah.
I mean, it depends. When we're given a project or something, like a task, then how much water we're in. But so good so far.
I'm happy that I watched the previous classes on YouTube. It really helped with the comprehension of it all.
Oh yeah, a second time around can really help it sink in. But you mean previous classes from your cohort or previous cohorts?
I have watched previous cohorts, but I meant specifically our classes, like with the
Right.
ones you've been in this week.
Yep, I always found that a big help. It helped just reinforce stuff that I already thought I got, and it helped clarify stuff that I didn't get. And I encourage everyone, book one-on-ones. It's such a valuable resource of this course.
I was asking Max, are there like a group of senior like coders who could just adopt me so I can like speak, you know how like you can learn like a different language in school, but like if you go like abroad and live with a family and speak it, it's different, you know what I mean? He said that's more of like an internship. When you were in the cohort, did you do an internship? And if so, where or with whom?
I did not do an internship. I did book one-on-ones like weekly. And you know, I met with my classmates as well to go over material.
Did you get a job after completing this? Or
Yeah, did you get a job?
So I'm working. I can't help but feel that all the things I learned in the course really help with my job. It's a job that I was working extremely part-time before the cohort, and now I'm there full-time. And I'm doing a lot of JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. So I'm drawing on the skills from this course every week at that job.
because I was
Nice.
looking for an intern, but I can't find any right here. I don't know. Something maybe like 20 hours or something like that a week or something. But I don't know.
Well, I know during our cohort, they had some apprentice programs came up. I don't know if that's something that's going on this.
Yeah, in October, we'll have the Syracuse Surge apprenticeship program that will open up right around graduation date for applications. Unfortunately, there won't be enough apprentice slots for everyone in the program, and the applications are open to the public. But the apprenticeship program is meant for people who have some coding experience, i.e. are graduates, but are looking to kind of jumpstart their career. So that's organized through Syracuse Surge, which is a Center State CEO partner. We have graduates of Careers in Code who went into the apprenticeship program and are now at Thales, Lockheed Martin. We had conversations with Upstate Medical, but I'm not sure if they actually went on to doing an offer with them. Trying to think of what the other companies are. But yeah, the apprenticeship is a great program to be able to come out. You're at the perfect coding level. And then basically, if you get into the apprenticeship program, you then go and interview with different companies. And they're all different job roles as well. So There were some more on the QA side for testing, quality assurance. There were some on the full stack web development side. And then there were some more on like traditional software engineering at Lockheed Martin. So the apprenticeship program, we will definitely have more details for you towards the end of the program, because it's just a little early to start looking into opportunities right now. Last time the apprenticeship program launched, there was about a month overlap between the apprenticeship program starting and graduation from Careers in Code. And so we did have at least 2 or 3 students go through the apprenticeship program while they were finishing up Careers in Code. But it was a very intense time for them. So we have it timed out a little bit better this time around, so that there's about a month between graduation and the apprenticeship program starting. And like I said, you are not, guaranteed admittance to the apprenticeship program just because you went through Careers in Code. But we definitely have a close partnership with Center State. Liza Semiday is the Syracuse Surge coordinator, I believe her title is. So it will the apprenticeship won't kick off until October. But I am not sure. I didn't think the application was open yet.
June 5th is when it closes, it says. Apply by June 5th. It doesn't actually say like a hard deadline, but
That was the previous one, I believe, from the previous year, but per my one-on-one with Max, there should be one opening up in October.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that
Hmm.
yeah, May 30th, 2022 is when applications are due. So that is for the old one. I'm gonna message Liza and just mention
That's
that
right.
that is still out of date on the site.
Chat.
This one is 2022 then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the one in the chat,
The one in the chat, it says apply by June 5th, but if you click on the application link, it takes you to 2022. So their website's out of date. That June
I
5th
see,
date was
gotcha.
June 5th, 2022, not
Yeah,
2023.
It says 2022 on there. And I talked to Max about this, but I forgot about it after to follow up with you. But good to know. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Max.
Give me 1 second, Eliza. Message Liza before I forgot.
And in addition to internships, apprenticeships, those kind of things, other resources that I found really useful after our cohort, like Erie 21, you can still attend like different workshops and like for resume building and working on your LinkedIn profile, and those are very useful in themselves and also just another chance to network.
85% of all jobs come from networking. And there's a similar statistic about jobs that don't even get posted. They get filled by who you know in your network. So getting out there, talking to people, seeing what they do, being active in local communities. The Syracuse IO community has a jobs channel, all very important. And you don't want to think about a interview that you didn't get an offer as a failed interview. You want to look at that as more experience, right? Because every interview you have, you get better at answering the questions, knowing what kind of questions are going to come up. You get on that company's radar. So if other positions open up, oftentimes they will pull your resume and consider you for that other position as well. So just because you interview and don't get the job does not mean that it's a bad interview. It just means that it's better experience, more practice for the next interview.
Oh, I had a question about I think you mentioned that we're gonna get an email from Lemoyne, like something.
Not
Uh,
necessarily. We're still digging in to see if that's possible.
Yeah, that'd be great to get.
I just want to say one thing before we start. There were a few private sector jobs on LinkedIn. I know one was like Airbnb. They were looking for an intern who did not have a degree in computer science. It was starting off at 120. I believe the applications just closed, but word has that they will be opening it back up. So if you have a LinkedIn profile, it's been working for me to find stuff. Maybe it can help you out. I don't know.
Yeah, LinkedIn, super important. I believe Laura covers that in some of the career modules as well. LinkedIn is pretty much a standard for job networking. Whenever I have a meeting, I go to LinkedIn just to get an idea of who I'm meeting with. And that's a really good step to do if you are interviewing, get a background on the person, see the details of what their job is. Sometimes you're interviewing directly with your manager. Sometimes you're interviewing with someone on another team, but it's always helpful to know kind of what their background is, and sometimes set up some questions about, that person based off of what you've learned from LinkedIn from them. So definitely important to do that. Kenny, the Lemoyne email is beneficial because it gets you a .edu. And so there are some resources that you get access to with a student email address that you wouldn't have otherwise. But we're still trying to figure out the logistics of that. You could use a .edu Syracuse email, an SU email. That would definitely work, but it just depends on what resources you're looking at. So for example, in Figma, we get a free Figma license for a year or 2 years because you're learning it for education. So a lot of companies will give you free access to resources for to get you hooked as a student. And then they'll, hopefully when you go into the job force and you go, oh, I need to, make a mock-up, you start thinking about buying that license because that's what you learned in school. We Work Remotely is definitely a good resource. Syracuse IO has a Slack channel that's very active and we'll post in the jobs in there. Lots of different opportunities for you. And we'll have more details about that. Laura has an entire career week, week 23. That is a optional week. If you get all of the career coaching assignments done in Canvas, you don't need to attend that week. However, I have heard from multiple people that they've gotten a lot out of that week, just learning from Laura, getting the career coaching. That's going to cover things like cover letters and resumes and your LinkedIn. That's going to talk about how to do your job search, and learning that just because they have a list of requirements does not mean that you need to meet all of those requirements. We also have a mock interview program, which I can actually now post in Canvas. And now is actually a great time to go over that. So we have 6 mock interviews available for you. Right now, they are all done live. Let me grab that link and go over that document with you. Give me 1 second. Okay, so in Canvas, there is a link under the home section or under the module section to mock interviews. So if you pop that open, you'll see that we've got a breakdown of mock interviews that are available to you. And I'm sure you've noticed that when you go into my Calendly link, there is an option for like the 25 or 55-minute meetings. There's also a link for mock interviews. So this gives you a breakdown of what interviews are available to you. We Option one, we've now crossed that threshold where you should have all the knowledge it takes to complete the option one mock interview. We are making our way up to option 2 and 3. So once we complete the JavaScript modules right before Ryan comes in towards the end of June, you can either do option number 2 or option number 3. So I don't give you the interview question in advance because you wouldn't have that interview question in the real world, right? This is meant to emulate actual tests that you would complete in order to get a job. So this is options 1 through 4 are what we call a whiteboarding interview. And that is a very common thing in the job process to say, hey, share your screen, pop open your text editor. We're going to give you this problem or some starter code, and we want you to build out or fix or do this solution for us live. And so if this is one of those things where you're like, that kind of scares me, the reason to do it now is so you get that practice. Everyone bombs their first whiteboarding interview. I would much rather you bomb it with me than bomb it with an employer where you go, oh, and you get that feeling of like, maybe I didn't learn what I thought I learned during the program. So these are all interview options that are available to you. They are totally optional now. We may circle back and have a requirement to complete a couple of them. But for right now, they are optional. You do have everything you need to know to learn or to complete the option number 1 interview. And then as we go on in JavaScript, option number 2 and 3 will also open up to you. And you can tackle that probably by the end of June. The end of next month. What we're headed into is option number 4, which is what you're going to be learning with Ryan, along with what you're going to be learning with me and React shortly thereafter. And then option 5 and 6 are a little different. Option 5 is what we call a behavioral interview. That is normally the first or second interview in the hiring step. So that's the tell me a time when. What's your greatest strengths? What's your greatest weakness, right? The typical job interview questions you get, not technically based. So you can do option 5 at any point during the program. And then option 6 is kind of reserved for the end of the program. That is not what we call a whiteboarding interview where you actually have to code live. Option 6 is more about just rapid fire questions, right? Hey, give me the definition of this term, or what's the difference between different data types in JavaScript, or it's just a rapid fire list of questions that cover the entire curriculum so far. So something to consider. Encourage you guys to do this. The first one's always terrible. I've got about a 50% rate of making you cry by the end of it. Would much rather have you cry in front of me than have you cry in front of an employer, right? Get that experience, get that practice. I promise I'm not scary. I give you good feedback, and you can always retry an interview as well. That's no big deal. So to book this, you just head to my Calendly link, same link as always. You pick whatever time is available, and it will give you the breakdown of what options you can do here. Option 1 and 5 are available to you now. Options 2 and 3 are good for you to go by the end of June. And as we finish up the JavaScript module, I will also remind you of these mock interviews just to get you practice. It's not called Careers in Code for nothing. We definitely want to get you job ready. And one of the biggest things that we've heard back from our students is they get to a whiteboarding interview, a technical interview, and they freeze up. And it's like, I know this, but I can't think, right? And your brain just doesn't get the right code out of your head. So getting this practice is very, very important. I have never applied to a job and not had a technical interview piece. Some companies will give you a take-home technical test where you can work on the project and turn it in a couple days later. Other companies will give you 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. They'll ask you to share your screen. They'll give you some starter code and they'll say, hey, go build this from scratch, or build this based off of this data set. So definitely get practice with me. highly encourage that. Any questions about mock interviews?
How did you get to the page?
In Canvas, it's linked under mock interviews down at the bottom.
Module and okay. And how you schedule one? Oh,
The
right here.
link is right in the document for the Calendly link.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you said we can schedule these with you?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
Corwin mentioned LinkedIn Learning is a free resource from Onondaga County. I do have that linked. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like a hard thing to sign into LinkedIn Learning through the library, but once you make it in, it's an awesome resource. LinkedIn Learning is essentially YouTube for professional courses. It is a very expensive thing that I don't even think that you can sign up for as a consumer. LinkedIn Learning is marketed towards companies so that their employees can do continuous learning and education and continuing to grow. However, it's a great resource because anyone who is an Onondaga County resident can get a free library card at any of the Onondaga County libraries, basically any library that isn't a college. You can get your Onondaga County library card there. All you need is like a utility bill or something with proof of address. You get your free card. You can get it through colleges as well. I don't know if Lemoyne has it, but anyway, you can get it through Onondaga County. If you open up the physical locations link, I have it linked to LinkedIn Learning as the second link in that document. Bookmark this link because this link specifically takes you through the Onondaga County website and will let you, when you click on Get Started, enter your library card number and your PIN, and that gives you access to the entire resource library. So Onondaga County libraries, LinkedIn Learning, lots of great courses in there, not just specifically for JavaScript. You could do a search for React and get a whole video series in there. You could say, hey, project management, something that we touched on a little bit. I want to learn more about that. Great series in there. You may be starting on a new job and they may say, well, we use this framework called Angular and we don't teach Angular as part of our curriculum. So you could go in LinkedIn Learning, do a search for Angular and get an entire video course on there, along with practice quizzes and resources and all of that stuff. So highly recommend LinkedIn Learning. There was a student last cohort who stumbled onto this and didn't realize what kind of resource it was until the very end of the program, and then got hooked on it and went through a bunch of courses on there. So LinkedIn Learning, very great resource. Any questions on that? Okay. Couple of things that I wanted to recover before we dive into our next project. There they say that things always come in threes, right? So I like the mantra, see one, do one, teach one. What do I mean by that? Well, you see me do the project, then you try to do the project on your own. And if you can do the project on your own, they say true mastery is when you can teach someone else how to make that project. Okay, well, you guys obviously are not going to turn around and become boot camp teachers right after this, right? But you can kind of modify that see one, do one, teach one mantra with the see one, do one, explain one mantra. So once we complete a project in class, can you see me do it? Can you do it on your own? And then can you turn around and comment up your code to the point where someone who doesn't know JavaScript could come in, read your comments, and understand what that next line of code is doing? That's where we want to push ourselves to, right? Just getting that code running isn't enough. Getting it running and understanding it to the point that we can explain it, that's what we want to shoot for. So that's what you can use one-on-ones for. Even if you have your code all functional, you can still schedule a one-on-one with me and go through that. Or you can do that with your fellow students, right? don't be afraid to schedule a study session. Anyone who has common space access can get together a study group on a weekend and say, you know what, hey, we're just going to go through the code from this week and we're going to make sure we understand it. Or maybe we're going to do a little side project using the same concepts and make sure that that's all working. That is a great way to think about approaching your code and saying, hey, not only do I have my code working, see one, do one, teach one, or explain one is a great way to think about it. The other way to think about it is kind of the engineering mindset, which is, hey, when I'm looking at this code, it all makes sense, but I have no idea how to do it on my own. That's when you want to break it down into the what, how, and why. Okay, what are we trying to do? What does the user need to do in order for something to work? If we can't articulate what we're trying to do, there's no way we can get our code to do it. So sometimes you need to take a step back and say, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to make it so that when the user changes this dropdown, the data shows up on the screen. Oftentimes when we have questions or when we're stumbling, it's because we haven't taken a moment to pause, think through as an engineer, and actually articulate what we're trying to do. Because 9 times out of 10, when you take that moment and actually write that step down, whether it's a comment in your code, whether it's something on your notebook, whatever it is, when you can articulate what you're trying to do, how you do it becomes much easier. Then we get into the how. And when you can articulate the what, you can Google the how, right? Oftentimes we go, all right, now that we know what we're trying to do, I can put that into Google and figure out how I'm going to do it. Hey, how do I get JavaScript code to run when a select changes? That's your how. Once you get your how done, you go back to the why. Why is this JavaScript running? Why can the computer understand this? It's a slight variation of the see one, do one, teach one, but those are the steps to go back through and say, why did this work? It's not enough to just see it in the browser and go, all right, I'm done with this project. Why did we write the JavaScript that way? If you can wrap your head around that, that's when it becomes easier to apply this to other projects. Any questions on either of those?
Just curious, if you're in an interview and you start Googling how to do something, is that cool?
Absolutely. I've actually walked out of an interview that said I could not use Google. There's not a day in my life that I've written a line of code and not had to Google something.
Okay, good to know.
Even like when we were doing the pre-requestees for the hackups day, like the thing was like, if you Google it and you know how to do it, the whole thing for the JavaScript, because I only did with the Code Academy, the JavaScript, and then the rest of some of the stuff we had to Google and find out because we never did it before.
Yep, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Next thing that I want to review is our JavaScript resources, because at the beginning of JavaScript, I went through all of them and it's kind of overwhelming, right? Because you're like, well, I don't know any JavaScript, so these resources don't make any sense to me. However, I pulled up 2 resources today, and not 1, but 2 one-on-ones, and I got light bulb moments. So there are 2 really important resources that I would like to reshare with you guys, because they may make more sense now than they did when I originally showed them. So I'm going to pop open, I'm going to go to the assignments, and I'm going to go down to the week 7 JS module pre-reading. If you pop that open, the 2 favorite resources that I use are the Visual Learning cheat sheet and the Code Academy JF reference cheat sheet. If you are someone who is a terms learner, if you are someone who likes flashcards or like looking things up in the dictionary, the Code Academy resource is the one for you. Every concept that we've covered is over here on the left. So when you hear me talking about parameters and you're like, what is a parameter? I never got the definition for that. You can pop open functions, scroll down here and see function parameters. And not only do they give you a definition of what a function parameter is, they give you a little code snippet for that. So if you are someone who is a textbook learner, this is a great resource for you to go through it and be like, whoa, Max has said a lot of these words. Now I know what those words actually mean. This is my probably second favorite resource. My first favorite resource is the visual learning from I Love Coding cheat sheet. And the reason why I like this one so much is because it uses that same technique that I use during class where I start drawing on the code, except this one is actually visually pleasing enough that you can understand what it's saying. So this cheat sheet does the same thing. It doesn't go quite as in depth, but it does give you not only the term, but the definition of the term, and then a visual of what it's pointing to. So you hear me talking about objects all the time, and you're like, key value. Max keeps on saying key value. What the fuck is a key? You can come down here and see, oh, these 3 items are the key in this variable, in this object. Oh, the value, here's the definition. That's what the values are. We can come down and see functions are covered here as well. I will note that this is using the older syntax for a function. It's not using the arrow functions, but same concepts apply with parameters, naming the function, all of that stuff, passing in information, invoking the function or calling the function or asking the function to run, all meaning the same thing. So I would encourage you to go back through the list of resources now that we have had 2 weeks of exposure to JavaScript and see if any of these click for you, because they may have made no sense to you 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. But now that we've got some JavaScript experience, you may start to realize, oh, I was struggling with this concept and all that I needed was the definition of the term. So those are my 2 favorite resources. I highly encourage you guys to print these out if you are a person who likes printed copies. And you can always shoot me a message and say, hey, next time we meet in person, could you print a copy of that out for me? Or you can use your stipend funds to print paper out at Staples or FedEx office or UPS store or whatever's nearby. Highly recommend that. Any questions on resources? This is, Asma, to your point, this is all about repetition, right? You probably are not comfortable with on-click events yet or on-change events yet. We're still learning how to write functions. We're still learning about data structures. We are only in week 1 of 4 of JavaScript, or technically 2 of 5. We have a lot more practicing to do. The good news is the number of new concepts slows down, but we don't get harder. This is the hardest part of the boot camp. When we get to week 12, that is your make it or break it moment. If you are fully caught up in week 12 and you feel like you are just barely keeping pace with the boot camp, chances are you're going to finish the boot camp strong all the way through week 24. If you are struggling to finish that week 12 project, and I mean really struggling, can't do it, even on one-on-ones, that's when we start going, all right, did we hit a saturation point? Do you have the momentum to push through and keep going here? Or is this a moment where I go, this boot camp might be a little fast for me? We are a couple weeks away from that turning point, but the week 12 project is our midterm project. You have not only 2 weeks of Ryan to learn all those concepts, you have an entire week off of class for the 4th of July week to work on that assignment, and then it's due right before we come back. So that summer break is super helpful, not only to work on that project, but we also have a capstone check-in the week that we come back from summer break, right on that Monday. And so that's kind of a double whammy. We want to get our JavaScript project done, our API New York Times, but we also want to be seeing progress on your capstone. Any questions on that? Okay. Two VS Code extensions that I would like to show you guys, and then two little code snippets, and then we will dive into following along and getting our Movie Seat app going. So I am going to pop open my VS Code. There are two extensions that I would like to show you guys. One is if you go to File, you will notice that print is missing in your VS Code. I keep on telling you guys, print out your code, use documentation for that, write your notes right on it, and there's no way to print in VS Code. That's dumb. We can fix that. So if you go into your extensions and do a search for the word print, you will see there is this option with 180,000 installs on it. Go ahead and hit that install button. And all that it takes now is if you open up a file, you'll notice there is a little print icon in the top right. Now, if you click on that printer, it will open up your code snippet in Chrome, which is a little weird, but it brings you right open to the print screen where you can print out your code. You still have your line numbers. And if you're printing it in color, it won't match the exact coloring of your VS Code, but it will have code highlighting syntax or color syntax. So it's a little bit easier to read. So again, that was in VS Code. I click on extensions over on the left. I do a search for print. The top option is the one with 180,000 installs. Go ahead and install that. And now if you open up any file, you'll notice there's a little print icon. And when you click on that, it will pop open in Chrome and give you the option to print it. The other extension I would like to show you is you may have noticed that my comments, especially on some of the code, make it a little bit harder to read the code, right? When you're going through this, all the comments help you line by line, but now you're looking at this and you're like, where does button clicked end? How do I match up my curly braces? There's so much code in here now, I can't even see that the curly brace is down here. So we kind of get excessive with our comments, right? Because we want you to understand every single line of code. When you're working professionally, every single line of code isn't going to have a comment on it. Only the more complex ones or the ones that need a little bit more explanation will have comments. So while this is a great step, sometimes you want to just be able to hide your comments. In order to do that, we go back over to the extensions and we do a search for hide comments. And the top one that comes up is this hide comments. It has 12,000 installs. And if we hit the little install button on that, that gets the extension installed in VS Code for us. And what we do is we open up the file. And just like the print icon that got added for us, there is now this little hide comments button. And if you click on that, you'll notice our code becomes much easier to read because those comments are now hidden. They are not gone. We can bring them back by just toggling them back on. But if you are commenting your code like crazy and then trying to write more of it and your comments are getting in the way, you can just click on that to toggle your comments on and off. Any questions about any of that?
I did the print thing, but I don't see it like showing up anywhere.
In your extensions, does it say disable and uninstall?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go to your files, open up a file, and it should show the print in the top right.
Okay. Yep, got it. Thank you.
It's kind of hidden there, and I don't know. It doesn't add it to your file menu, which is where you would think it would be. So you do have to know to look for it up in that top right area. Any questions on that? Is that helpful for some people, hopefully? Some options, you don't have to install them, just
Yeah.
letting you know they exist.
The hide comment one is nice.
The nice thing is VS Code is all open source. And so a lot of people will be like, well, it's dumb that it doesn't have a print feature. I want to be able to print. And so someone literally built that extension, built it right into the VS Code code base. And now anyone can get it by just installing it. So extensions are definitely very powerful. Okay. Last two things that I want to go over before we dive into new code tonight. You do not need to follow along with me here. You can if you want, but this is just a little playground. We're only going to be using this for 5 minutes. This is not something that coding along will really cement the knowledge, but you are welcome to code along if you would like. I am going to do this just in the week 7 day 4 folder, because in case you want to reference this code later, I just want to make sure that it is in the repository. So I'm going to make my day 4 folder. I'm going to call this playground.js. Okay. 2 common questions I've been getting in one-on-ones. When do we use quotes and when do we not use quotes? Actually, 3 questions. Quotes versus not quotes. What are the freaking curly braces because we use them everywhere? And how do we do a for loop? What's the point of a for loop? Why would we even bother with that? So let's start with a for loop. I'm going to say, hey, I've got a list of grocery items. I'm going to just call it groceries. Now, because it's a list, we need to put it in square brackets because a list is an array in JavaScript. Now, let's say that I need to keep track of what I need to get. I need to get milk, I need to get eggs, I need to get bread, and I need to get, I don't know, an apple.
Max,
Okay.
we
Commas
can do
are
a live share for anyone who wants to follow along.
not on this one, just because it's a very, very lightweight one. I'm going to encourage you not to code along on this one, just to let those concepts kind of sink in. We've got our groceries here, and I'm going to want to say, all right, I want to keep track of how many dairy items I have. So I start that list out at 0. Okay, now I need to go through each item on this list and figure out if it's a dairy item. Well, I could check 0, then check 1, then check 2, then check 3. But what happens when I add on to the list? I don't want, no, I still did it wrong. DAIRY. There we go. Thank you. I don't want to have to write a new, anytime this list gets added to, I don't want to have to write more if statements to check every single one of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through and get every item from my groceries. Okay, what's this loop doing? It is saying, hey, go get the groceries. That's this up here. Every time that I get an item from the groceries, take the milk and dump it into my item. Then go do any code in here. And when I am done with this curly brace, I come back up and now my next item is eggs. So eggs goes into my item. Then the next loop is going to run and I am going to get my bread, and that's what's going to show up in my item. To prove that, what I can do is console.log my item. So I open in terminal, I do my node, my playground.js, and what do I get? I get milk, eggs, bread, apple. Okay, well, I want to keep track of how many items are dairy items. So I'm going to say, yes, a for loop will always run through, a for of loop will always run through all of the items in an array, no matter how many items are in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, if my item is milk, then I want to increase the number of dairy items by 1. Then I'm going to console.log the number of dairy items is dairy items count. I come in here, I run it, and it says the number of dairy items is 1. Okay, but it's not, right? Because are eggs considered a dairy item? Maybe not. Let's add ice cream.
Well, check line 11.
Oh. So I want to add in ice cream. I swear I can spell. Okay, so I come down here and I still get the number of dairy items is 1. That's because in my loop, I now need to tell it if the item is milk or the item is ice cream. I save, I come down here. Now the number of dairy items is 2. Well, what happens if I add another carton of milk to my items and I decide that I'm a pig and I'm getting ice cream several times? Now I run it and I have 5 dairy items. I'm not modifying this for loop at all. This for loop is keeping track of all the items in my array. And it is going through each one of them and saying, okay, milk. Is milk a dairy item? If it is, add 1 to it. If not, keep going. So I come in and I get my ice cream. Is ice cream a dairy product? What if I want to keep track of how many are dairy products and how many aren't dairy products? I'm going to say let non-dairy items equal 0. And if the item is milk or ice cream, then add to dairy items count. Else, non-dairy items ++. Now I can come down and say, once I have looped through all of the items, which is saying this code is going to go through each and every item in the list. And once it's done going through the list, it then and only then is going to come down and console.log out the number of my dairy items, but it's also going to say the number of non-dairy items is my non-dairy items. And I could even, if I wanted to, console.log the total number of items is, and add my dairy items plus my non-dairy items. So take a moment with these lines of code only and make sure that you understand not only the what we were trying to accomplish with this code, the how we accomplished it, but the why. The how is that we looped over it, right? The why it runs in the JavaScript is understanding that this item is going to equal every string in this array one at a time. We're looping over it, right? What's a loop? We're checking the same thing over and over again. What's the point of a loop in JavaScript? When we're looping over an array, it's to say, hey, instead of dealing with this whole group of items, instead of dealing with all the groceries, I want to deal with each grocery item one at a time. That's what this for loop is doing. It's saying we're going to do this one first. And when we're done with that one, this is the next item. And when we're done with that item, we're going to get the eggs. And it's going to go through that whole thing, which means item is going to be updated every time we go through that groceries list to get a new one out. Goggin, what's up?
So you see where it says where the if statement starts?
Yes.
It says milk // Why can't we put a comma there? Like what are those called, slashes? I don't know.
These are called vertical bars.
Okay, couldn't we use a comma?
No,
Okay, that's how you separate like different items. Check
that is an OR operator. And we know that because if you go to the cheat sheet, you can see the operators are all broken down here, and this is our OR operator. So what we are saying in JavaScript, we are saying is the value of the variable item equal to the string milk, or we read the double vertical bars as or, is the value of the item equal to ice cream. And that cheat sheet is what's showing us how that works, right? With the equality, with the OR operators, with all of that. The plus plus, I'm not sure if that is covered in this cheat sheet because it's kind of a shortcut. It is the equivalent of saying non-dairy items is now going to equal non-dairy items plus 1. So this and this are equivalent. This is just a shorthand for that syntax. Jen, what's up?
So where you put in the for loop where it says if item equals milk, item equals ice cream, that's where you told the computer that ice cream and milk are both dairy.
Correct.
Okay. And then everything else is non-dairy, or do you have to declare that to the computer?
Everything else is non-dairy because it's in the else.
Ah, there you go. Thank you.
Shay,
So if you
could not
added
have-
butter. Sorry.
if we wanted to add butter, we would say or item is equal to butter. Now you'll notice that because butter is not in my groceries list, we can add that, but the output isn't going to change. It's still 5, 3, and 8. Shay, we cannot use a double ampersand because an item cannot be both milk and ice cream. Well, which is kind of stupid because you need milk to make ice cream, but that's not the point. You don't use a dash as you don't use that as a logical operator. The two vertical bars just mean or, and then the double ampersands mean and. So if you think about it back to like logic that you may have taken in some college class or in covered in some algebra, the if statement is basically saying, does this evaluate out to true or does this evaluate out to false? So does item equal milk? Or does item equal ice cream? Or does item equal butter? If any one of these are true, because they are OR operators, that means that that code will run. But if it's ampersand, they both have to be true for that code to run. So an item would never be ice cream and butter, and so it wouldn't work in that case. How are we feeling about this? Does this click? Do we understand what that for loop is doing?
For sure, it made more sense.
Max,
Yes.
I'm picking up everything you're putting down right now.
And you're going to challenge me with a new one.
I will be at that point, but no, I actually have a question about the 2 lines you have there. And I hope I don't sound dumb, but how do you do that?
Oh, good question. Shift and the key between delete and return.
Shift and the key between delete and return. Oh my
you
god,
do it twice.
right there. Oh my god. Thank you.
Sequoia, what's up?
So I think I'm getting it. I just am confused as to why we're doing the plus plus at the end of.
So this line of code and this line of code are doing the exact same thing, just on different variables. So the plus plus is a shorthand to say, take whatever the dairy items count is and add 1 to it. So the same exact thing is we're doing down here, right? It's always the right part of the equal is going into what the left part of the equal is. So take non-dairy items, which happens to be, let's say it's 3, add 1 to it, so it's now 4, and put 4 in non-dairy items. This line of code and this line of code do the exact same thing. It's just a shorter way of writing it. Add 1 to the existing value of dairy items count, or take whatever the value of dairy items count is, add 1 to it, and put it back in the variable. Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess I'm kind of missing. So why do we want to add 1 to the list? Or
we're not adding 1 to the list. We're adding 1 to the number of items of that type.
Okay.
So this, think about it as, okay, I want you to go get me milk, ice cream, and eggs. Okay, well, you know that that's 3 items. But if I ask you how many dairy items is that, you would say, all right, well, milk is a dairy item, so that's 1. That means ice cream is a dairy item, we have 2. And then eggs, that's a non-dairy item, so that's 1. Right? So if you think about it as, if I gave you this list of items and asked you to count up how many items are dairy items and non-dairy items, what would you do? You would start both at 0, and then as you counted them, you would add 1 for every time that you found another dairy item or non-dairy item. We're doing the same thing here. We can't just have the computer count that. We started it at 0, and every time it finds a dairy item, we add 1 to the count. And every time it finds a non-dairy item, we add 1 to the non-dairy count. Then once we get over all the items in the list, we can then console log out the results of what we have been counting. And yes, Natasha, we start the list at 0 because we haven't gone through any of the items yet. Every time we run through the item, we add 1 to the count depending on what type of item it is. And then once we're done, these variables now are no longer going to be 0 because we incremented them in the loop. So we get the output of them down here.
Max?
Yes.
So let's say, for instance, I have a grocery list, right? And let's say, for instance, I have non-edible items on there as well.
Sure.
If I wanted to differentiate between dairy products and non-taxable items, would I just simply repeat this, or it would have to be a different statement?
So let's add greeting card and a t-shirt shirt to the list. Well, what we can do is we can say check to see if it's dairy. Else, if the item is a greeting card or the item is a shirt, then we want to increase the non-edible. I probably did not spell that right.
It's good enough for me.
Does that answer your question?
Thank you for showing me that.
Yep.
So let's say we're making a to-do app, to-do list, right?
Mhm.
And you have to like put in every item. Do you know that you would ever get from Walmart, or you would just how would that work? Like just for saying like
That's when you get into a database, right?
Okay.
That's when you're saying, hey, I want to add an item to my list, and I type in EG and it goes, do you want eggs? That's when you need a database to store all of those products and do a search.
So how would the database know? We would type into database, or we could use somebody else, like let's say Walmart's database, something like that.
You're talking week 18 and 19, buddy. Hold your horses.
All right. Sorry.
Natasha, what's up?
Okay, hello. So my question is, suppose your grocery list had like, I don't know, 50 things in it, but only 5 dairy things. Are you going to need to make, what is that called? A for loop for all the other 45 individual items? Like there's no way to group them besides assigning a declaration?
So
Am I making sense?
we're kind of matching up here, right? We need to know what a dairy item is. There's no way JavaScript just knows what dairy items are, right? So
Mhm.
we got to source that data somewhere. So this is basically a way to say, hey, we could put 5,000 things in this list. And
Right.
as long as we knew that milk, ice cream, and butter were all dairy items, it would go through 5,000 items on this list and pick out all of those items without us having to modify the for loop or the if statements at all.
So there's no way to address the remaining items on the list without naming them specifically? Like you can't say for and then name all the dairy items and then say else and then like everything else.
Well, we are, right? Everything else is falling into this category right here. So if it is dairy, it's falling into dairy. If it's non-edible, it's falling into non-edible. And then if it's any other item on the list, it's falling under non-dairy right now.
So that's what I'm asking. You had to tell it that those other items were non-edible items. Is there no way to say if it's not this, then it's a, I don't know, non-edible item? There's no other way to do it besides specifically saying this is non-edible, this is non-edible.
How would the computer know that a shirt is non-editable?
You'd say everything in this list. What is the list called? Is it groceries?
Groceries.
Right. So you would say for const item milk, ice cream, butter equals dairy items. And then you'd say else if you would have to write everything else on that list to say that it's a not dairy item.
Well, you could put it in the else.
But how does the computer know that like apple and greeting card and bread are all non-dairy items when you didn't like specify
Well,
those
because it only
specific things
said
and name them non-dairy?
that's what I'm saying, because only those
Yeah.
3 items were named as dairy items. So can we assume that the other items are non-food items, or do you have to specifically tell it?
you can always group it as an else. You could say, I could get rid of these and say, let anything else count equal 0.
That's what I was looking for.
And in here, I would have to take out this else if and say, if anything else count plus 1. And then I can say the number of any other items is everything else count.
So it doesn't matter what you named the anything else count. It's pretty much what you didn't specify in the first line is going to be grouped in that last line, no matter what you name it.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Question answered.
I just want to say something off of that. So a computer is not just going to assume that something that that doesn't have a value declared is being thrown into like a leftover bucket. You should always declare the value of something.
If you need to keep track of it. So you may say, hey, Wegmans just needs to know how many dairy items are in a list. Wegmans may not need to know how many other items are in your list. And then you wouldn't need anything else count and you wouldn't need this else statement. You could just write the if statement.
Okay, thank you.
And there are certainly more ways to do this when you're keeping track of 100 different dairy items, right? Then we get into having 2 arrays, the array of all the groceries and then the array of all of the dairy items. And we can actually cross the 2 of them. We can actually say, hey, is this item in my list of dairy items? But from a simplicity standpoint, this is hitting on if statements. This is hitting on logical operators. This is hitting on for loops, for of loops. This is hitting on data structures because we're using a counter, which is a number, and we're using an array, which is another variable type. And then we're also touching on output here. So we just hit half of the slides in that JavaScript cheat sheet because we're touching on all those different ideas. All right, feeling good about that? Last call for questions before we get rid of our groceries.
Can I just say something really quick? I mean, just review. So when we're using the if statement, we're using so when we're using the else statements, that's when we're using the curly braces. When we're using the if statement, we're using but everything has to go inside of the curly brace for what we want it to run in that section, right?
Correct. What we're basically saying is if whatever is between the parentheses is true, we're going to execute the code between the curly braces.
Okay.
If whatever is in here is not true, we will not execute this code. We'll come down to the else statement and execute whatever is between those curly braces.
Okay.
Feeling good? Last call for questions. Okay. Speaking of curly braces, we've got a lot of freaking curly braces or brackets. I have heard both of them. I don't know that either one is more correct. We see curly braces if the animal is equal to a dog, console.log, it's a dog. Just make this valid JavaScript here. Okay, what are the curly braces doing? It's saying, hey, if whatever is true in here, do whatever is in here. It's not the only place we see curly braces, though. We may have animals that we want to loop over. What are these curly braces doing? They're saying, hey, for each pet do what is between these curly braces. Where else do we see curly braces? You see curly braces in functions. What is the point of the curly braces in the add, the for, and the if statement? All the same thing. We could be doing multiple lines of code in this for loop, in this function, or in this animal. What we're trying to do is group all of this together, right? We're trying to say, hey, whenever I ask you to add numbers together, go run a bunch of lines of code. And it could just be one line in those curly braces, or it could be multiple lines. Whenever we see curly braces in any one of these examples, we call this as a block of code. A block of code is just a hunk, a chunk, or whatever you want to call it, a grouping of a couple lines of code. You can think about parentheses as kind of like a math operator. Ali, I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Sorry, like the way that I was asking it is like, so like everything that is in parentheses, the computer reads as like that's actual, like what is the computer reading? I don't know, like is it reading something different?
Parentheses or curly braces?
When it's reading what's in between the parentheses, like is it performing that?
It is checking for equality. So it is saying, does animal equal dog? If it does, then do whatever is between the curly braces. If it doesn't, don't do this at all. Right? So we could say, is the animal equal to dog? No, it's equal to cat. So it's not going to output it's a dog. It's just going to ignore this line of code completely. Yes?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay.
Max, would you say, is there any similarity between the parentheses in the if statement, the for loop, and the function, or would you say they all perform a different?
They all perform a different task. The parentheses here are saying, hey, this is only going to run if whatever's between these parentheses is true. This down here is telling it, hey, what do you want to loop over? Give me the list of all the items that you want to loop over and tell me what you want each item to be called while we loop over it. The parentheses down here are actually for the parameters. It's saying heads up, when we use the add function, we're going to send in two different numbers. These parentheses do kind of line up with the parentheses you would use here, which are actually sending in the parameters that go to the function up here, the arguments.
Max?
Yes.
In the chat, what I'm putting, am I saying that correctly? If not, please correct me.
If the yes, you are. If
Okay.
it's not necessarily, this would evaluate out to a Boolean. So you're saying if the animal is equal to a dog, the Boolean is true. So go do what is between the curly braces. If the animal is not equal to a dog, the Boolean is false. So we will ignore what is in these curly braces.
And curly braces always hold objects, correct?
Ah.
Oh, okay.
You hit on our exception. Everything so far in our curly braces here are showing what a block of code is, right? They're saying, hey, we want this chunk of code to run if this if statement is true, or every time we run over a for loop, or whatever we call the add function. That is what we call a block of code, just a couple lines of code grouped together. That's what makes a block of code. The
Yes.
exception to that is an object. Now we see curly braces, and what do you want to think? Oh, that's a block of code. That's a hunk of code that goes together. Nope. An object, when we are declaring a new variable, when it is a key value pair, we also use those curly braces there. That is not a block of code. That is the exception. That is an object. Why in God's name would they use the same symbol in two different places? Well, look at your keyboard. We only have so many different parentheses and square braces and curly braces that we can use here. They ran out of things and they were like, well, I guess we can pull double duty here. And the computer will be able to tell whether it's a block of code because it's going to come after a for, or it's going to come after an equal, or it's going to come after an if, compared to, hey, it is a new variable, so this must be an object. So you are right, Rain. It is either the curly braces are either a block of code or an object. They are
Thank you
not
so
an
much
array, Natasha. An
for the
array
clarification.
uses the square braces.
Thank you for the clarification.
Can you pop your terminal down a little bit? No, just like so I can see what it's console logging out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even run this code. I don't even know if it does run. Curly.js. All right, take a minute, make sure you got levels of understanding here. We've got one more concept before we go on break, and then we get to you being able to code along and follow with me.
You said it was see, do, recreate. What was the analogy you used earlier?
See one, do one, teach one.
Okay, I'm trying to prepare myself for the do one.
Or you need to know what you're trying to tell the computer, then you figure out how to tell the computer to do it, and then you understand why the JavaScript is running the code the way it is.
Can you go over the last const add again? So
Yeah.
I know that if and the for are, I know that's doing math. I'm just not sure exactly what the equals and then greater than sign is doing.
So this is a function that's saying, hey, go run a couple lines of code so we don't need to repeat ourselves. So add is a bad example. Let me think about like changing Celsius to Fahrenheit is a good one, but the general idea here is that we could be doing multiple lines of code in this function so that we don't need to tell it over and over again how to do something.
Is that the only time you're going to use that? Like
the other time you use a function is an on click, right? Hey, I want a couple lines of JavaScript to execute here. I'm going to put them all in a function and I'm going to name that function. Then I'm going to tie that function to the on click of the button itself. So when that button gets clicked on, the event knows what group of JavaScript lines to run.
So if you have like an if and there's more than one line of code in the if, why don't you use that at the if?
The
So-
equal greater than is
Yeah,
part of
like-
a function declaration.
Correct. This is the syntax that tells it that this is a function or a group of code.
And it's called an arrow function, and that looks like an arrow.
So think about it like this. When I call add, we say it's calling a function or executing a function, because we're actually telling it, now's the time I want you to console log the num1 plus the num2. So the computer, when all of this code runs, right, it says, all right, the animal is a cat. All right, if the animal is a dog, it's not, so we don't do this if statement. Okay, now we're keeping track of animals. There's a dog and there's a cat inside of it. Let's loop over it. The first time this runs, it's going to log out dog. The second time this runs, it's going to log out cat. I'm now gone through all the animals. I'm done. Now it comes down and it goes, okay, const add. This is a function. So I'm just going to remember this. I'm not going to actually add any numbers together yet. I'm just going to remember that if I get told to add numbers together, I know how to do that. So the computer actually ignores everything in here. Then it comes down and it goes add. Oh, I know how to add. What do you want me to add? I want you to add 1, which is the first argument, and 2, which is the second argument. So what happens is the computer now takes that 1 and that 2 and sends it up into our num1 and our num2 up here. Now we take that add, we take the data that it needs to run the add, and we send that into, which is why it's the arrow function, to our function here. Now it takes the num1 and the num2 and it goes, oh, num1 is 1, num2 is 2. Add those two together, console log it out, it's 3. Then it goes away and it goes, okay, I'm done with that function. I don't have any other lines of code to add or to run. Then it comes back down here and it goes, oh, you want me to add again. My numbers I'm going to add, 3 and 9, get sent up into num1 and num2. Add 3 and 9 together, log it out, and that is why we see 12 down here.
So the add is actually the function, and everything that comes after it is what you're telling the computer to do after it sees the add button.
Correct.
And then the for and the ifs are just statements.
The for and the if, yes, are blocks. The code in between the curly braces are blocks of code because they're between the curlies. But yes, that you would just call that an if statement or a for loop.
Yeah, it's
as
not telling the
opposed to
computer
add,
what
which
to
is a
do, it's
function.
just telling it if this is the case, then there's something lower down there that you have to do.
Correct.
Okay.
Or, oh, this is an array of items and I want to get each one of them out of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Natasha, what's up?
Okay, so on line 14, if you would have put parentheses after the plus sign between or before num2, that would turn it into a concatenation, or did you need to add anything else?
Concatenation is only for strings. It's not for numbers.
Okay. All right, I'm getting there. All right, thank you.
Yes, plus is another one that does double duty depending on the data type. If it sees 2 numbers, it goes, oh, that's math. I know how to do math. But
Right.
if it's for a string, it's like, how do you put 2 letters together? Oh, you just smush them together and that's what you get. And so concatenation is if you are adding anything to a string data type, it just concatenates them together compared to if it's a number, it's actually going to do the math on that.
Only strings though.
Only strings.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure you could concatenate on other data types, but we're going to say only strings for now. Weird things happen when you add anything together other than numbers or strings. All right, we ready for the hardest example right before break? When do we use quotes and when do we not freaking use quotes? Because that is a confusing thing. We use quotes whenever we have a string of letters. When we're like, hey, computer, we're not asking you to do anything here. We're asking you to just keep track of these letters. So down here, I said, or up here, I said, my animal is a cat. Well, if I am up here and I say, I want to actually log out what the value of animal is. I'm going to type in animal here without quotes. I'm going to comment some of these out so it's easier to see our output. So I get cat. Why do I get cat when I asked it to log the animal? Because animal is not in quotes. So it said, oh, animal is a variable. I'm going to go get the value of animal and log that out for you. Okay, what if I want the word animal to show up in the console? I literally want ANIMAL to show up in the console. I'm going to do that in quotes. Now, even though animal is a variable name, because I put it in quotes, the computer knows, oh, I want the word animal to log out. Okay, let's practice that on an object. Down in the object, I can say console.log car.make. What am I going to get out of that? I'm going to get Toyota, right? Okay, what if I want to get the key that I want to retrieve is the model? I can now use bracket notation and get out the key. Okay, what's happening there? Key is not in quotes. So it's going to go up to key, see that it's a variable. It's going to go get the value of the key, which happens to be a string called model. It is then going to go up to my car object, find the model, and log out RAV4. What happens if I put key in quotes? Now it's going to say key is in quotes. I don't give a crap about what's in the key. I am literally going to go up to the car and I'm going to look for a key called key. There is no key called key. There's a make and there's a model. So when we run that code, we get undefined because it literally can't find the letters KEY in my object. So when we put it in quotes, we are able to specify model or make, or we can take it outside of the quotes and specify key, which is going to realize I'm looking for the model and log that out here. So this is the exact same thing as this. We always prefer dot notation, but we cannot use dot notation if we are looking for what we call a dynamic key. A dynamic key is just when we use a variable for the key name. Plush.
Is it safe to say that dot notation can be replaced by brackets and quotes in any instance?
Yes, but the reverse is not true. You cannot replace all brackets with quotes with dot notation because brackets with quotes will work with spaces. Dot notation will not work with spaces.
Like yesterday with San Francisco.
Exactly.
Got it. So will this dot notation, will it dot notation replacing with the brackets and quotes, will it also work on, say, console.log instead of like console dot? No, just
only objects.
Oh, got it. Perfect.
Max?
Yes.
So 2 ways I could have gotten to the model. I could have did the console log car dot, I believe, dot make dot model or car dot model, or I can
just
take
car dot model, not car dot make dot model, because then we would be going another layer deep in the object.
You're correct, and they have the same value make and model. Okay. Or I could just simply take a variable and throw it into there. So whenever I want to reference it, I could just put key.
Yes. And you can call key anything. We could call this thing to get, thingy to get. And as long as we use that here, that will also still work.
Okay, I do understand. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm realizing key is a terrible name to call that because you would think key might be a keyword. It's not. You can use any variable name there. Okay, I know we're over on break. I know that this is a weird concept to get. Are there any lingering Java? Let me put it like this. Over the break, think about, are there any lingering JavaScript concepts that you feel like you don't fully have your head around? And if you do, come back at 7:25 with that list of those questions. And we will go through anything, because it doesn't matter how many projects we do. If you're not comfortable with the syntax, if you cannot explain the why of the code, it does not matter how many projects you do, unless you understand the syntax. So think about any lingering questions that you may have, come up with some challenging things that I can code out for you live on the spot, and we'll go through them right after break. And then we will get our project set up for the movie theater app before you guys kick off your weekend. Go on break, 7:25, come back with some questions for me. Okay, your homework assignment for over the break, think about JavaScript concepts that we want to touch on before we kick off our next project. Did anyone think of a question, a concept, a piece of free code camp, something in the cheat sheet they don't understand, something from the past 4 days that we've done that you don't understand? Talk to me.
When are we going to start utilizing push, shift? I think I'm missing one. Pop.
Pop, unshift, shift, yeah, all of those. Those
Yeah.
are all JavaScript array functions, and we use them whenever we want to modify an existing array. So if we wanted to say like, hey, I've got my to-do, let me share my screen. I've got my to-do list, right? And that's going to be finish playground and then start movies. Well, if I want to add an item to the end of that to-do list, if I console log out my to-do, I'm going to be able to see my node curly. I'm going to be able to see my 2 items, right? The most common array method is what happens if I want to add something to the end of that array. That's when I can say to-do.push new item at end. And when I run that, I have to then console log back out my array again, and I get new item at the end. So push, to be completely honest with you, is the only JavaScript array method that I can use without looking up the documentation. Other than push, I cannot remember if I use splice or slice or shift or unshift or pop. Those are all fine array methods if you need to remove something at the beginning or add it on to the end. But I always have to look them up. What's the difference between shift and unshift? Oh, one works at the end, one works at the beginning of the array. whenever we're working with like an algorithm where we have to update the items in the array, or whenever we get a new item that we want to add into the array, that's when we are going to use those array methods. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Console.log and node aren't quite the same thing. Console.log is always going to show you your output. So console.log needs a console to show up in. Normally that's in the browser. However, we have another place we can run our code, and that is in the terminal using Node. So Node is the one that's actually running the code. And then if there's a console.log in that code, it's going to show you in the terminal, which is Node's equivalent of the console. So console.log is the JavaScript command that allows us to see the output of our code. Node or the browser are what we call the JavaScript runtime engines. Node and the browser are what are actually executing the JavaScript so that we can see not only the output in the console, but also see like the changes to the document object model and the inner HTML and all of that good stuff. So console.log is like the output command, then Node is like hitting the play button or the run button, the start button. Plosh, what's up?
Can I ask a question from yesterday's code?
No. Go ahead.
I still do not understand that event.target.value. Like, when is it that you pull a value?
Yep.
Because you get an element by its ID.
Specifically for a select, or is it also confusing on an input?
Actually, I mean,
Let's do both. Let's do both, because I think we'll draw a parallel there.
Okay.
So I'm gonna just make a blank HTML page, and I'm going to put an input type text that has like a placeholder of name. And then I'm gonna do a select, and I will say it has an option of student and an option of teacher. Okay, now I want to say, I'm also going to put a button here that says log values. And then instead of making a separate JavaScript file, I'm just going to use a script tag in here just for the sake of simplicity. And a good reminder that not all JavaScript has to be in its own file. So I am going to say on click of the log values, get the event. And so I'm going to say const log values. It's going to get the event. This is making a function. And what I need to do is be able to get access to what got typed into the name here. So I am going to add an ID onto it called name field. And I'm going to say const name field equals document get element by ID name field. So I'm matching this ID up with this ID here. The document is going into the HTML portion. It's storing it in the name field. Now, the name field, we can do lots of things with, right? We can say name field dot style dot border equals 5px solid red. And if I go live, I see my little interface and I can type something in and I hit log values and all of a sudden my test turns red. Okay, why is that? Because we clicked on the button, it fired off this function, it went into the HTML and got the name field, and then it went into the style property, put a border on of 5px solid red. Well, we don't really care about the style. What we want to know is what got typed into that name field. So instead, I'm going to console.log namefield.value. So I come back over, I type something in, I go to my inspect, make sure my console is open, and when I click log values, I get whatever is typed in. Okay. That all makes sense up until that point?
Yes.
Okay. That doesn't answer your event.target.value. the event.target.value, or the event.target is whatever the event happened on. So if I come in here and console.log out the event.target, what do you think I'm going to get?
Event, whatever. Ask that again, please.
What do you think the output of this event.target is going to be?
Whatever that event happened on. So that would be log values. So the button.
The button, exactly. So it's a trick, right? Because you think it would be whatever you typed in here, but when I click log values, what comes out is the button itself. So I can access that target and say, what's the inner HTML of that target? And I'm going to get out log values. I could change the styling of this target by saying event.target.display style.display is now going to equal none. Now, when I do whatever here and hit log values, it made that button disappear. Okay, that's all great, but what about event.target.value? Well, the problem is this event is now happening on the button itself. What we ended up doing is adding an onChange event here that said select changed, which gets the event. Then we come down here and say, hey, select changed is going to get the event. And we're going to console.log the event.target. That is going to give us the select itself, but we don't care about the select. We care about what they select did. And so in order to get that, we can use the value. So I come in here now, when I select teacher, I get teacher. And when I select student, I get student.
Okay, understood. So one more question is, why is that on change happening on select and not on option? I guess it makes sense. No problem.
If we wanted, we could use an on change up here. And in fact, this is kind of interesting. We can just copy and paste that whole on change. Now, whenever we type, nope, you're going to make a little liar out of me. And target value, on change, and target value. That should have worked. What I expected to happen and what didn't happen is anytime that I typed a letter in here, I expected it to log out. Oh, that's what it is. If I type something in and click outside of it, it's now going to log that out. It also is going to log it out if I change it here, because both selects and inputs use the value property.
Right. And you were clicking the button. That's when it was not working, because that's an on-click thing. No,
all I had to do was say, click outside of the text box, and that's what made it log out.
okay, understood.
Actually, different behavior than React. And I think Doug may be interested in that. I expected, so in React, whenever you type a letter, it is going to log that out as a change to the input. So I'm kind of surprised that it's only logging out when I click outside of the text box.
I just Googled it. And I think there's an input event.
Oh,
So you say on input.
Mm.
There you go.
Okay, I was expecting to see that as well.
That's a virtual DOM under the hood that I was not aware of a difference between vanilla and React. Learn something new every day. If that goes completely over your head, that's totally fine.
A little bit, but yeah, I see what's happening though. Just a different property. Is that what it's called?
Different event.
Okay, thank you.
Or a different HTML attribute. Technically, it's both.
Right.
Did that answer your question about event?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Asma, what's up?
I'm just wondering if objects are the most common types of data that we usually work with.
They are the most common type of complex data. When we are working, it's very common to see strings in objects. It's very common to see numbers in objects, right? So we work with strings and numbers the most, but those strings and numbers are often in objects, and those objects are often in arrays, because we don't want to keep track of just one car. We want to be able to keep track of a list of cars. And that list of cars may have data structured so that all of those objects are structured the same way. But because we have multiple of those objects we want to keep track of, we put them into an array. So I can't like emphatically say like, yes, we use objects all the time. Well, I can say, yes, we use objects all the time. I can't say we use objects more than arrays, because we use arrays a lot. And then what do those arrays have in them? They either have objects, or they have strings, or they have numbers. So you won't be working with null and undefined a ton. You'll be working with Booleans, but more kind of in if statements. But numbers, strings, arrays, and objects are definitely the four most common data types that I have worked with in the past 10 years. That's not to say you won't run into a null or an undefined, or, you know, there's something called a big number or a big int. And that's when you're working with like numbers that are bigger than the trillions. You have to have a different data type for that. I've never had to professionally use a big int. And there are some people who are like, you need to learn every single data type. And I'm like, no, you don't. You know, you don't need, you're not going to use a big int unless you're working with a mathematician or something like that.
Okay, makes sense. So just to make sure I get it. So we typically first see like arrays, and then within that, we either have like an object, and within that, we usually have like strings or others.
Or numbers or Booleans, yes.
Okay,
And you can, what gets confusing is you can put an object in an array, you can put an array in an object, and so it's important to be able to intermix them, right? So I can say, hey, I want to keep track of my cars, and my cars, because I have multiple ones, have to be in an array, and then in that array, I'm going to have an object. And in that object, I'm going to have a string, and I might also have a number. Then, because I have multiple cars, and because it's in an array, I can use that same object structure and add in some additional information. Now, I may also have a object that's not in an array, and in that I may have something like raining true, which is a Boolean, but then I also may need to keep track of chance of rain throughout the day, and that's going to be an array. And that array may say 30, 90, 20. So we can intermix, and that's why it's very important when we use that onion concept and we go, all right, we're going a layer deeper here. It's important to say, all right, now that we're at this layer, is this an array? And if it is, we have to use our 0, 1, 2 index. Or is this an object where we're going to say .make or .year to get into that? And sometimes you get to structure the data however you want. And sometimes you're making an API call where they give you the data and you have to practice getting down into the level that you want to extract out that information.
So to get the make and the year in this situation, do we have to, yeah, there you go.
Oh, I'm in index. Toyota. And then if I wanted the second car's make, now I get Tesla.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask.
Can you
Got it.
just read that line of code and like, so we go into, so we're gonna console.log, but what we're gonna do in there, like, what's gonna be console is we're gonna go into cars and then go to the first index, which will be the second. And then we're gonna take the make.
which is equal to the value of Tesla. And so
Okay.
that's what we're going to get in our console.
Okay, so if we wanted. All right, I see. And then if we just wanted like make, would it give us both makes if we took out the one in the parentheses and just did cars.make?
Nope. Cars.make is going to be undefined. Needs
Okay.
to know which cars make you're looking for. So if
So-
you wanted both of them, how would you solve that?
So will we have to do
0,1.
yeah, like start at 0 and then go through?
Yes, in what?
Let for loop.
A for loop.
Okay,
Or
okay, yeah.
let
Okay,
car
so
of cars console.log car.make, and now we get both Toyota and Tesla.
wait, so okay. But I thought we could only do that for arrays. So we can do it for objects and arrays? Like the let.
What are the objects in?
Oh, okay, I see. Sorry. All right. That makes sense.
You can technically do for loops over objects, but that's a can of worms I won't get into tonight.
So like best practice would be to use for loops for arrays, and then for objects use
Dot notation.
dot notation. Can we get that example of the dot notation? Is
That's like
just the
car.make.
Okay, all right, yeah, all right.
Just a quick question. So for the,
Wait. Okay.
okay, so for the, when you're doing car bracket 0, if you had to use bracket notation, if you had a dynamic key, could you do bracket, or would you have to have something separating them?
No, you can do const like num car equals 1, and then console.log cars num car make. That does the Tesla for you. Was that your question?
No, so it was more like if you needed to use bracket notation because you needed to have a dynamic key. So if you had the year, you needed the year of the Toyota, and that was what you had made your key or your whatever variable. Would you then use car to key, or just cars and then to get?
That also works.
Okay,
2022 is coming out.
perfect. Thank you.
You come in on as the voice of God when one of you don't have your speakers muted. It's
Sorry.
quite funny. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank
Okay.
you.
We like to make an entrance.
Rain, what's up?
I feel like I had a twofer, but I feel like my question on how to target different objects was answered. We
Okay.
need to go through mine too. So going back up to where Palash was asking his question, and you targeted the name field's border style with the 5-pixel solid red. Are you, instead of using the style CSS, which you don't have on here, one, when you don't have the style CSS,
You can still use CSS.
you can target it via HTML that way.
Yes, or in your JavaScript. Yes.
Does it make a difference? Should I have a CSS file?
Only if you had CSS that you wanted to apply on load of the page.
Okay. And the second part is,
Let me put it like this. It's very rare to see a website without CSS.
yeah, and I'm like, well, why didn't he do that in CSS? But there isn't a file for it. So I just didn't know that you could really do that in HTML. So I guess I'm learning.
Not only is there not a file for it, but the reason I don't have a file for it is I didn't want that red to show up until I clicked on the button.
Ah,
So I actually need JavaScript to be able to say, hey, this only is going to happen when you apply it.
and I see G in the comments saying inline CSS is that
You
right?
could, yes, you could say style equals here and say your border is going to be 5px solid blue, and that will apply as well.
Awesome sauce. The second part was I just want to say hi to Caitlin. Hey, I do see you.
I'm working while I'm working.
Yes. Hey.
Any other questions, Rain, or are you good?
I am good to go.
Cool. Allie, did you still have a question about making something for both? And then Jen, I'm coming to you next.
Oh, it was down at so down more. Yeah, so right there where you created the two variables, numcar and toGet.
Yes.
So that knows that because how does it know that?
It's not in quotes. So it knows to get the number 1 because numcar is not in quotes.
So what it's doing is, so it's pulling a number out of car.
Yes.
Okay.
It's pulling a number out of numcar and saying, oh, that's 1. So go get the car index 1.
Okay. So
and then it's saying, what is to get? To get is year. So go get the year out of car number 1 and get 2022. And that's why we see 2022 over here.
okay, I get the to get part, but the num car is
It's the same as putting 1 here.
Oh, okay. You know what? I was completely ignoring the cars in front of it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We're still saying go up to this array. But then we're saying, well, which one do you want? We want numcar, which is 1, which is going to be this object here.
Mhm.
And then what do you want inside that object? We want year. So go get that.
Okay, so but we would already have to know, like, so we would have to keep in memory, like our own memory, that numcar is that 1 index.
Yes.
Okay.
It is called a Plus, that's a good question. It's a const. It's called a dynamic key just because we're using a variable. Granted, that is a constant variable that you could make as a let, but the general idea here is more that you could do something like this. You could say, when log values is clicked, go get the name field and then log out the cars 0 dot bracket name field. And so what I can do here is actually type in make and hit log. Nope. Oh, that should have worked. Oh, name field dot value. I can type in make and log and get Toyota, and then change that to year log and get 2023. So it's less about the mutability of the variable and more that the variable itself could change, and because of that, it's considered dynamic.
So all like let and all of the other are also dynamic, that means.
Yeah, they're not. It's just considered a dynamic key when you use a variable, no matter where the variable comes from, to retrieve the value out of the object. It's just called a dynamic key. And I'm now questioning my own sanity. Dynamic key JavaScript. Yes, dynamic property keys is what they are called. So yeah, I guess hypothetically it could be with a constant variable, but you're kind of crossing definition streams there. So it's just whenever you use a variable, regardless of where the variable comes from, that's what's considered a dynamic key. You could say, car num, you could do this here and say console.log car, if we do just name field value, and we say 1, we get Tesla, and then if you do 0 and log, you get Toyota. Corwin, was that your question?
Nah, I was just asking if you could like switch the name of it to car num, like, or is it like?
Oh, here?
Yeah. Okay, that's just like a placeholder, right?
Yeah, that's saying
It doesn't matter what the name is.
correct. Yeah.
You can do it down at the bottom too, where we had num car. So like if we put car num, it would be the same thing. Like that's just giving it a name.
Okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Jen, did you forget your question yet?
Nope, because everybody else is playing into it. Is it gonna get easier for us to figure out what is just a placeholder? Like sometimes you put names in there that you're making up, but we don't know you're making them up. And sometimes you put names in there that are like, this is what that name is always going to be.
I'm just the god of JavaScript, so I tell JavaScript what to do and it bends to my will.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like, are we ever gonna know if like, is there by chance any way that you could just be like, hey, when I put in select changed, that's what it's always going to say, or I'm making this name up right now and you can make up whatever you want when you log it.
So when you're naming a variable, that is when you can make it up. Anything else you can't.
Oh.
I feel like that is a very bold statement that Doug is now processing to see if there's any time that's not true. So whenever you're doing your const and putting in a name here, you can make up whatever you want. Event is technically a variable that you're making up, so you could call that whatever you want. But then once you name it that, you have to be consistent on it. So you can say thing the user did, and as long as you use that consistently, that will still work here. So parameters are technically variables that you can name yourself. And anytime you use a const or a let, you can name it whatever you want. The same goes for when you're making this variable name, you could call that whatever you want. And then you could call make whatever you want. You could call that manufacturer. But now whenever you reference the data inside of that, you have to use manufacturer.
All right, I just have to make sure I know exactly which words are variables, so it'll be easier to know which ones that we can make up and which ones we can't.
Yeah, it's basically whenever you're making the data up or the variable name up, you can use whatever you want. And it kind of gets complicated, right? Because in this for loop, we can't make up cars because cars is already made up here. Now, if we rename cars here and we rename cars here, we can call it whatever we want. The same goes here. We could call this item, but then we need to call it item in here.
As long as we use whatever's after the constant.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And Caitlin does make a good point. It's very common. You want to really do a pet peeve of mine, just call it E. Drives me nuts. You see E.target.value, and I'm like, what the fuck is E? E is event. You will also very commonly see it as EVT, which is slightly less on my nerves. But how long is it really going to take you to spell out the word event so we understand, hey, that's something the user has done? So I really like event. Caitlin can testify that I have denied a merge request that she has put in as E. But I like personally spelling it out.
I
So
played.
there are words like event and stuff that everybody pretty much uses in the same spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm like,
I
you're using
figured-
it over and over and over. I just didn't know. I was like, is it something that's supposed to be?
And that's convention, not a rule.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's best practice because it makes the code easier to follow. And so most developers will follow that conventional rule, but it's not written in stone. You could do whatever you want, but yeah.
And it is tough. I don't want to discount the, oh, it's so simple. If you're naming a variable, you can call it whatever you want. Like that, obviously there are some complexities to that, right? But when you're seeing things like console.log or event.target.value, right? It's like you can't call .target whatever you want because you're reaching into something that JavaScript knows. Right, so the event, and you can actually dig into that. If you console log the event here, you can see all of the details. Look at this, it's a curly brace. If it's a curly brace, it must mean it's an object, right? So we can actually get any of the information outside of this object. We happen to be digging into this object and getting the target. Well, what's inside the target? It's a button. What's inside this button, if you go all the way down, you can actually see things like inner HTML and a couple other pieces like the style is in here. The type is in here. The tag name is in here, all kinds of stuff, right? The text content. There's all kinds of properties in the document object model to the point where, I mean, look at how long this is. You would never have all of this memorized, right? So what you realize is, oh, I'm going to remember a couple things about the document object model. I'm going to know that events have targets. I know that text inputs have values. I'm going to know that I can use like .style to apply CSS. That's all I remember about the DOM. There are all kinds of other things that you can do with it, but those are going to be your most common ones.
It was just a little confusing because like I saw, I know there's spots where you're supposed to be able to name it yourself, but you like throughout all of these things, name it the same thing each time. So I'm like, but wait, is that supposed to be the name for it? Or is he making
it's because it's convention.
Yeah.
So I can name this whatever I want. And for beginners, it's easier to understand this as like item, right? Because we're getting each item out, or we could even call this like, oh, for each object in the car, use that. But naming convention is to say car of cars, so it's singular, plural.
Okay. Yeah, see the car of cars. I'm like, why does he keep doing now? I can't figure out which one goes where, the plural or not. And then I was like, okay, maybe that's why.
The plural is referring to the whole list.
Yep.
The singular is referring to each thing in the list that we're looping over.
And you just name that whatever, but the car is not like there's not a constant car anywhere.
No, for
You just
let
name
or
that.
for const car, this
Okay.
is where it's coming from.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. For this info, I hit go live. And then in my browser, I popped open the browser console because this is all in a script tag that's in my HTML. So I can't run this JavaScript through Node because it's got HTML in it. So instead, I popped open the HTML in the browser. That's what ran the code, and then I can see it in that console.
Like, where'd you get that big object? For example, about a
I put a console log in the log values, and the log values only runs when the button is clicked. So I have to click this button in order to get the event, and then I can see all of that information.
Got it.
All right, how are we feeling? Allie, do you have a question?
Yeah, okay, so I just had two quick questions. So if we named for like let car of cars, if we name like if we said let object, we wouldn't be able to do that for another function. I mean, not a function, another loop,
Another
right?
for loop? We can, because that's a really good question. This object is scoped to these curly braces.
Okay.
So if we said console.log object here, it's like, what's object? Object, the JavaScript only knows what object is if we're in the scope of this block of the code. So I can console log object while I'm inside this for loop, and I can console log cars inside the for loop and get all the cars, but twice, or I can move cars outside and still get the cars because the scope of the cars is up here compared to the scope of object, which is inside this block of code only.
Okay, so potentially you could use object for everything, but it's just easier to use.
Correct. Yeah, it's like object. What's object, right? When you call it car, you understand that you're getting the information about the car. Well, if you called it object, it's like, well, what's in the object? What does this object represent? So you want to name variables descriptively so you understand what kind of data is sitting in that.
Okay, perfect. And then just for clarity, so when we say like the log values event, when we made that const of log values, like if we made event log values, like if we said hi, will we have to go down and then put log values high after the const? That's what you mean by repeating it over?
I'm not understanding your question.
Okay, so I think up a little bit more.
Here?
So, no, I think it's up more. Up more. Nope, sorry. Wait, where did it go? Did we delete it? Okay, right here. Okay, so where it says button on click log values event. So like instead of event, if we put log values high at the top one, we would have to use high again down below.
That's a complex question. It has to be called event in here.
I see. Okay. But could we call it high down below and it would just
That's a good question. Yes, you can. This is coming out. So it has to be called event in the HTML side of things, but it doesn't matter what it's called down here.
So, okay, sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time. So if we put in the one below, because we're just clicking the log values button. So if you, would it be, like, would it make it easier for somebody like a developer if they put log values equal in the second one, user clicks log values? Or no, because you'd have to rewrite that again.
Event is the standard naming convention for any event that happens. You could be descriptive and say event of user clicking on button. But yes, there is a time where variable names become too long. And in this case, log values is very clearly a well-named function. So we can assume that the event is the user interacting with requesting that log values to come out.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions that I have.
It's somewhat rare to deal with two events at the same time. Like that gets into, I don't know that I've ever had to handle that. Yeah, I guess the only time I've had to handle that is if someone hits like Command S on the keyboard. That can technically be two separate events because the Command key is getting pressed and then the S key is getting pressed. But there are ways of handling that in your JavaScript in one event. All right. How many of you have I bored absolutely to death?
I thought this was really good. It provided a lot of clarity.
It is one of those things where it's like, I'm glad everyone's having the light bulb moments. This is like group office hours, right? Where you get to all ask your questions, but it's kind of tough because you could be like, oh, why didn't we just do this on day one of JavaScript? I would have understood it so much better. But at that point, you never would have known what questions to ask, right? And so this is a tough thing to balance. It's like, I kind of want to move this up a couple days, but at the same time, I want you guys to like have the challenges of seeing the JavaScript working and then know what questions to ask. So it's a tough thing to balance. The good news is I did not forget to resume the recording after the break. So all of this is recorded. You can go back and get all of this. All of that said, I feel like it's the equivalent of our Friday, and there's no reason why we need to start a whole new project. So I think we get out of here 15 minutes early. What do you guys say? I will stick around if you guys have...
Won't complain.
I will stick around in case you guys have any other questions that have popped up, if you've got anything on your capstone, anything like that. But otherwise, have an awesome weekend. When we come back, I want you all to take a look at what we're going to be building. I'm going to post it in the chat. Prepare yourselves for a 400-line project starting on Monday. Posted it in the chat so you can see what we're doing. We are building what looks like a simple screen. You can select one of the movies here. It shows you, it generates all of the seats and shows you which seats are taken and which ones aren't. You will be able to click on both the seats. It will show you which seats you have selected. When you hit the checkout button, it will mark those seats as taken. And if you go to another movie and come back to this one, you will see those seats remain taken. Rome was not built in a day. It is not built in 3 hours. We will be working on this project over multiple days. The most important part is you pumping the brakes and going, all right, you wrote too much code there, Max. Let's go back, explain that. Let's make sure we're understanding why it's doing that. This is the first project where we will write code and have to delete all of the code to do it a different way. But we will go step by step to understand how we build an application like this. We are off on Monday. I will not see you on Monday. I will be driving down to New Jersey on Monday. We will start this project on Tuesday. If you really want to get a head start on it, you can try it without me, but I do not recommend that. I will see you guys on Tuesday, not on Monday. We are off for Memorial Day. Have an awesome Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy this time off. I do have some available. I'm not even going to say that. I will see you guys on Tuesday.
Okay, bye guys.
And like I said, I will stick around in case any questions, you have any lingering questions. But otherwise, have an awesome weekend. I'll see you guys later.
You also got the seats to change availability when you refresh the page too. I was trying to see if the ones that I clicked would stay on there after I refreshed it, and they didn't, but everything changes.
Correct. Cool. The seats randomly generate at load of the page. And so we'll get into random generation. We'll write our first algorithm. We get into a very complex data structure. This is one of my favorite projects because it takes like 3 days to get through. But it's always like, oh, there's one more thing that I want to add, or like, oh, this seems very tedious. There's got to be a better way to do it. And so this touches on everything. This touches on arrays and objects. And when we need keys, this touches on how do we apply styling based off of that data. This touches on how do we dynamically generate HTML based off of that data. This is a heck of a project. And to be completely honest, one that I did not come up with on my own. I stole this from JavaScript 30 or one of the LinkedIn Learning courses or something like that. And when I say stole, I mean the idea. I wrote all the code myself. But yes, this is a several day project that you will be begging for mercy at the end of.
Sounds like fun, thanks.
So I forgot. Man. Shit, I forgot the question, man. One
Start
second.
the Jeopardy music because I'm leaving in a minute unless there are any other questions.
Oh, yes. I thought you said we're gonna have homework to do. What was that?
I took mercy on you. No homework this weekend. It's a holiday weekend.
Perfect. Thank you.
If we do it, do we get points for extra credit? Is it still up on Git or will it be up?
Let me look at cohort 4 to see if there are any homework assignments that I can make an optional one.
Like, don't stress yourself with extra work. Sorry. I'm like, that was taking too long.
So week 7 through 10, I have free code camp in there. And that's basic JavaScript ES6 and basic data structures. That would be very good to do this weekend if you're looking to get extra JavaScript practice.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Did you had experience with the website called Adabit for coding challenges?
What is it?
EDABIT.
I am not familiar with that one. There's one. There's one called Leet Code, LEETCODE.com. I'm familiar with that one. And another very popular one is called codeexorcism.io. And that's an interesting one. The thing that you want to keep in mind with those challenges is some of those challenges that are like things that I couldn't solve. So you want to watch on level of difficulty because some of those sites are like great for beginners and other ones are like, let's challenge the most senior developer to solve this problem in a way that is really, really tough. So just be careful on LeetCode or Exorcism or any of the other ones. And then Advent of Code has a special place in my heart up until about day 12. And then I say, screw this, this is too hard. And why did I even start this? But up until about day 10 to 12, it's really fun for getting practice.
Thank you.
Sequoia, what's up?
All right, so I want to switch gears. It's about my capstone.
Sure.
So can I share my screen?
Mhm.
Okay, so I am stuck on how to get my picture to like move up some so it's not like so I guess big across the screen. And I had a question like how do I sort of get like my logo like aligned with my nav bar?
Let me request remote. So for your image, you're trying to get the image closer to the nav bar?
Yes, like I don't like you saw how it takes up so much like space. I kind of just wanted to like I don't know if halfway is the right term to use,
Okay,
but
yep.
like start like right maybe like in like right where the start of the blue line is.
So the easiest, the easiest way is to crop the image outside of your code and then just use that. The thing that you want to keep in mind is that it's going to be responsive, right? So if you load this page on mobile, it's going to look different than if you load it on a desktop computer. So what you can do is you can make the image be in a col 6 or a col 8, and that way it isn't as big across, and that may achieve of what you want, but you kind of want to be careful there because the way that it looks on this size screen is going to be very different when you shrink it down to that size screen. And so that's something that you want to think through on your design of like, well, what do I want it to look like on mobile compared to what do I want it to look like on desktop? And then from there, you may be able to decide what way you want to go about the implementation.
Okay.
So that's one thing to think about. The other one is your logo. And let me just take a look at what you have. So you build it from scratch, which is fine. And you've got your call 8 and your call for your text end. So what I believe you need to do is use Flex for this. So if we say deflex here, and then oh, what did that do? I don't think that did. Let me just pull this out more. Okay. So if we say get Bootstrap and go to the docs and the flex, we scroll down and we find what example is what we're going for the most. And in this one, I believe what we want to do is get the items so they're kind of centered with the logo. And so that's going to be our third option, which is align items center. So I'm going to take that and put that in. I'm going to try it here and see. Aha. So now they're kind of in line with our logo.
Thank you.
And if you don't want the space above and below your logo, you can either check to see if there's margin or padding on it. And if it's not, you might need to crop the JPEG itself to make sure that there's not like transparent area above it or below it.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Great work. It's really coming together. It's looking good.
Yeah.
Last call for questions. Caitlin, you're ineligible to ask any. Have a good night, guys. I'll see you.